Hi, my name's Ali and I'm a fourth year medical student here at the University of Leicester.
Hello, I'm Mariam and I'm also a fourth year student at Leicester.
Today we're going to be going through the UCAT and the different subsections.
So starting off, what is the UCAT? The UCAT stands for University Clinical Aptitude Test. It's an admission test used by 32 medical schools in the country, and it's used to assess applicants' mental abilities. It must be taken by every student applying to those medical schools, and no curriculum content is included. In this presentation, we'll cover an introduction to the UCAT test, different types of subtests involved in the UCAT, how to best prepare for the UCAT, and then we'll also give you some hints and tips for performing well in the UCAT. So the UCAT is designed to test your skills that are needed in your career as a future doctor, and these things include things like doing quick arithmetics in your head, accurately deciphering information from looking at charts and bloods. So it's all relevant to your future career.
The universities that you can see listed on the PowerPoint are the universities that use the UCAT as part of their admission. Any other medical schools in the UK that aren't on this list will be looking at doing a different test known as the BMAT. This isn't something that we're going to be covering today. This list should be accurate for the 2022 cycle, but please make sure that you double check the entry requirements of the university you're applying for.
This year's registration opens on the 24th of May, and from this date onwards, you can start setting up your account and start sending in your relevant information like your ID and start applying for a bursary. We'd advise you to register and book as early as possible because this then allows you to reschedule or cancel if you need to. Test bookings start from the 20th of June and go on until the 22nd of September. And it costs £70 for students in the UK to take the UCAT. And if you're taking it from outside the UK, it's £115. There is a bursary scheme which entitles students for a free test. You can find more information on this on the official website.
So looking at the structure of the UCAT, it's going to be a 2-hour computer-based test consisting of 5 separately timed subsections. Each of those are going to have a number of questions in a multiple choice format. Once you start the test, you can't have a break, but you do have a 1-minute instruction section in between each of the subtests. The subtests are going to be scored independently of each other. The 5 different subsections that you're going to be looking at doing are verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, abstract reasoning, decision-making, and finally, the situational judgment test. For the first 4, you're going to be allocated a mark between 300 and 900, which is then going to be added up together to feed into your total score. For the situational judgment test, you're going to be allocated a band, with band 1 being the highest score and band 4 being the lowest score. It is important to note that some universities will automatically reject applicants with the situational judgment test of band 4. In order to score applicants, you get 2 marks after you sit the exam. One is the total score of the first 4 subsections, and the second is the situational judgment test. These are going to be noted on your applications to the medical schools, and they can impact applications in different ways, depending on the significance that the university places on the results of the UCAT. The individual scores are based on your raw data. In other words, the number of questions that you get right. Essentially, the more questions you get right, the higher you score, the better you will do in your application. If you would like to find out more about the scoring, you can check the UCAT website.
So in terms of the test format, the UCAT is a very long focused exam and it requires a lot of concentration over a long period of time. Each section has a real-time pressure, and as you can see in the table, it's essential that you remain focused and you stay motivated in every section. Some sections will require more attention than others, and you will work out which areas challenge you more through practicing mock tests. The timings you see on the screen at the moment include the 1-minute reading time at the beginning of each section before you can go on to start answering the questions. We'll now go on to talk about each subtest in detail and give you a bit more of our top tips.
The verbal reasoning section looks to examine your reading and comprehension skills. The questions are presented to you in a random topic, so everything that you're going to need to know about the question and the answer is going to be presented within the passages that you see. Your job is going to be coming up with or evaluating conclusions based on the topics that are presented. Ultimately, this means that the answers will be in front of you 100% of the time. In terms of the structure of the questions, there's going to be 11 pieces of text, each with 4 questions that you're going to need to answer about the passages. This gives you a total of 44 questions. You have 1 minute to read the instructions on the day of the exam, followed by 21 minutes of answering questions. In terms of question timing, this works out to 2 minutes to answer the questions of a text. This is just under 30 seconds per question. You will be awarded 1 mark for each question that you get correct. So what do those verbal reasoning questions actually look like? Well, the initial passage presented to you is around 200 to 350 words, and it's going to be in a random format, such as a newspaper article or a list of instructions. You're then going to have to answer questions about this passage. There are two types of questions that they can ask. It's either going to be a question about the passage with 4 possible responses, where you need to choose the best or most suitable response, or they will present you with a statement about the topic based on the passage, and you're going to need to decide if the statement is true, false, or if you can't tell based on the information that they've given you. So on the slide are some tips that we think are going to be really helpful. You want to make sure that you read the passages carefully so that when you answer a question, you can quickly tell which answers contradict each other and which answers contradict the text. You want to look out for ambiguous words like all, may, could, almost, might, commonly. These words are there to mislead you into thinking that the answer is one thing, whereas in actuality, it's something else. This means that you need to make sure that you know they might say something like commonly, but that isn't going to be the same as if they use the word always. You want to practice learning to skim read large text instead of reading everything word for word. This is going to save you a lot of valuable time so that you definitely make it through to the end of this section instead of only managing to answer half the questions. It might help to go through some non-fiction articles to practice this skill. In addition, it might be worth practicing some logicals in order to quickly answer questions that the test asks you to. For example, if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. Make sure, and I can't emphasize this enough, that you only answer questions based on what they tell you, and not off any past knowledge that you have on the topic. When you're skim reading, try to evaluate the text as a whole, as well as making sure that you read the question correctly. Make sure that you know the difference between causation and correlation, as this will be tested, and be careful not to waste any time with some of the type 2 answers. If you don't know the answer after 30 seconds, pick one which feels right and move on. And finally, don't be afraid of the can't tell option, because it is the correct answer a lot of the times. So if you think that's the answer, go with it. Don't second guess yourself.
The next section is the decision-making section. This section looks at your ability to reach conclusions, evaluate arguments, and analyze statistical information, all whilst dealing with uncertainty. This section has 29 questions, some of which have several subsections. You'll have 1 minute to read the instructions, and then you have 31 minutes to answer the questions. It's important to note that some questions which have one correct answer only award you 1 mark, but others have multiple statements are worth 2 marks. For these 2-mark questions, you will still get at least 1 mark if you partially answer the question correctly. The timing for these questions we'll go over in the next slide. To answer the decision-making questions, you're going to be given 6 main types of questions. Once again, everything you need to answer the questions will be present in the question itself. It's important to note that these questions are all standalone and don't share data between them. So when you move from one question to another, make sure you only use the information from the new question. The answer will always be in the format of a yes/no answer or a multiple choice answer. So in front of you, you have a list of the 6 different types of questions. You can get a logic puzzle. These give you a list of facts and require you to work out the information from them. And those are often worded in a way to throw you off. There are also yes/no questions. They essentially give you a few statements and you need to work out if, based on those statements, the answer is a yes or a no. Then there are interpreting information questions where you're giving information in the form of a graph or a table, and you then need to be able to come to a conclusion based on those graphs or tables that you've been given. Then there are recognizing assumptions questions. You're typically given an argument for and against a certain topic, and you'll need to be able to objectively evaluate the strengths of those arguments. You can also get diagrams where you are either given a Venn or Euler diagram, and you'll be asked to work out things based on those diagrams. They can also give you a piece of text and then ask you to decide which type of diagram is the most suitable. Finally, you can also have probability questions, and those are statistical questions where you need to choose the option that best explains the answer. So going back to the timings, this section is a little bit more nuanced. We would recommend that you spend about 55 seconds for the multiple choice questions and 100 seconds for the yes/no questions, which then gives you 20 seconds to read the 5 stems. If you follow this, you should have 40 seconds spare at the end if you need it. And all of this will make more sense once you've started to do a few mock tests. So once again, we have a few tips that we would like to share with you that we think are helpful for this section. So first of all, you obviously need to be able to use Venn and Euler diagrams. So make sure to get plenty of practice and review your basic maths and probability skills. Also, if a question seems too hard, don't spend all your time on it. Give it your best and flag it and come back to it later. Don't be intimidated by the large amounts of data. You don't need all of the pieces of information, so look for what you need to answer the question. Make sure you do lots of mock tests to get used to the test format, and use your whiteboards if it helps to sort of draw charts and make things easier to understand. Don't make any assumptions in this section. They sometimes include logical leaps that are specifically there to throw you off. So make sure you read everything really carefully, and don't be complacent in your logic. Some exercises will be worded in a way that is meant to confuse you, so be careful. The assumption recognition questions are usually intended to be controversial. So make sure that when you're answering them, you're objectively looking at the merits of each argument, as opposed to bringing in your own personal beliefs to answer the question.
The quantitative reasoning section assesses your ability to deal with numerical values presented in many different ways. Either with any question dealing with numbers, there's also going to be an element of problem solving. You're going to have 1 minute to read the instruction and 25 minutes to answer the 36 questions. Quantitative reasoning is one of those areas that students find particularly difficult and time pressured. This is because this section can be very variable. There's going to be some areas which will take a while to read the stem, but then literally a couple of seconds to answer the question, whereas other sections might take 40 to 45 seconds to answer questions. As mentioned on the previous slide, this section is going to present numerical data in many formats. This can include tables, charts, and/or graphs. The difficulty of these questions is generally aimed at around a good pass at GCSE level, so make sure that you're aware of the difficulty level by doing practice questions. The key to this section is to answer what you know as quickly as you can and move past those questions that are taking too much time. Try to answer the shorter questions in less than 40 seconds. This may mean that it takes you about 10 to 15 seconds to read the stem, and then leaves you about 20 to 25 seconds to answer all of the sub-questions underneath the stem. It is important to know that nobody gets 100% on this section, so try and answer what you know. There's going to be 5 possible answers, and if you're unsure, try eliminating some of the options that you know it can't be. Failing this, guess the answer, flag the question, and move on. Remember, you can always go back to the questions that you've flagged at the end if you have time. So moving on to some of our top tips, a lot of students overlook the online calculator. This can cost them valuable seconds, which is a nightmare on the test day. I'd highly recommend doing the math questions in your head that you can, and using the online calculator before the test day, as it can be a little bit fiddly and tricky to get used to. Being realistic sounds natural, but under the pressure of the test day, this can easily be forgotten. Try to eliminate unreasonable answers in your head. This way, a total guess has a decent chance of getting you the mark. The best technique is to try and answer 70 to 80 questions correctly rather than rushing through them all. Pacing yourself is really important. Through practice, you want to find a steady pace that will allow you to feel confident in answering the majority of the answers correctly. Rushing through can cause you mistakes and will do nothing more than increasing the pressure that you are already facing. As mentioned before, if a question has stumped you and you feel that you are taking too much time, put in your best guess, flag it, and move on. If you have time spare, you can always come back to it at the end. The strategy is going to be different for this section for everybody, so it's really important to do practice questions and find out what works for you. Get used to the pace and the style of the questions. Make sure that you're scanning for relevant data rather than looking at the entire set of data in detail. Then go back and look for the details when you need to know what you're looking for. Don't make silly mistakes. If you're not confident with your mental maths, use the whiteboard or the calculator. These can save you precious minutes. And I can't stress how important it is that you don't leave any questions blank. Even if you're flagging questions to go back to, make sure that you input an answer, because if you do run out of time at the end, you don't get to go back, then you will definitely lose marks, whereas there's no negative marking.
Next is the abstract reasoning section. So this is an interesting section, and it will probably challenge you in a very different way to any other exam that you've sat until now. It assesses your ability to critically evaluate information, and this includes things like recognizing patterns in the data set and identifying and ignoring distractor shapes. You will notice that you have just 12 minutes to answer 50 questions from 11 question sets in abstract reasoning. And there are 4 different question types, and each different type requires a different amount of time, and you need speed and accuracy. So answering abstract reasoning, there are 4 types of questions. Each type of question will require different amounts of time. You may spend 5 to 10 seconds on type 2 and 3, but then spend 30 to 45 seconds on type 1 and 4 questions. And this should give you enough time at the end to go back to flagged questions. For type 1 questions, you will have 2 sets of shapes labeled set A and set B. You will then try to identify the patterns of these sets so that you can allocate the answer shape to either set A, set B, or neither. So in the example we have given you, set A has 13 edges in each box and set B has 9 edges in each box. And your job is to place each one of the answers in the correct set or neither. Type 2 questions, you have to identify which of the answer shapes complete the shape series, which is given to you in the question. So you are looking for which shape follows the pattern. So again, we've given you an example, and in this case, the shapes are rotating and changing color in a specific pattern, and you have to recognize what this pattern is and find the next shape or the next box that completes the series. Type 3 questions, you are given a shape transition. You have to identify the rule that applies to that shape set and then match the question shape to the answer shape that follows the same rule. The 4 answer shapes belongs to either set A or set B. The pattern and choose the option that completes the statement. You have to recognize the rules of the overlapping object. So in this case, it's the order of the colors. And then you have to match the answer to the correct set. So 50 questions in 12 minutes is around 14 seconds per question. Don't be worried about this figure, because once you've identified the pattern, you'll be able to answer the questions really quickly for the set. So some of our top tips for this section is to have an approach, and one of the approaches that can be used is using the acronym SCANS. So this stands for shape, color, arrangement, number, and size. So in terms of shape, you're looking for what shapes are present, what sort of angles are present, what sort of clock faces are present, etc. Color, you're looking for the color of the shapes in each of the boxes and how they combine together and relate to the previous boxes. Then there is arrangement. So where in the box are the different shapes arranged, and is the color relevant to where they are arranged or how they are arranged next to each other? Is it related to the shape inside the boxes, etc.? Then there is number. So how many shapes there are, how many sides there are, and what is the total number of sides or total number of angles in each box. Then you have size. So how does the size of each shape vary between the boxes? Does it correlate to their color, their arrangement, or is it something else or another shape? Is it the total number of boxes inside? And it's good to have a systemic way of working through, so type and size of objects, number of objects, properties of objects, etc. So you have to sort of learn how to search for these patterns, and it's really important because this will increase your chance of success. And this is, again, probably a new thing that you have to learn to do. It's important to search for the simple patterns first. So try to start on the patterns with the least amount going on. And this is likely to be the easiest set to identify the pattern with. So go to the least busiest box. Don't always look for complexity. Some sets look a lot more difficult than they actually are, and it might be a really simple thing that you need to look for. Watch out for distractors. So some shapes are there to distract you, and they are put there on purpose to test your ability to evaluate whether the information is relevant. And remember your time limits. This section is really fast paced and it can be really difficult. So make sure that you are sort of looking at the time as you're going through the section. And most importantly, keep practicing this section.
The situational judgment subtest is the very last part of your test. This is important because you must remain focused until the very end. It is a very important part of the UCAT because it's going to assess your real-world setting skills. These questions can be fun to work through, as you might initially be surprised by the correct answers, and they're going to stretch your awareness of both important and appropriate behaviors. As you can see on the slides, the situational judgment test assesses your key traits of integrity, perspective taking and team involvement, resilience, and adaptability. These are all key qualities of a good doctor. The situational judgment test is made up of 69 questions, which is going to be asked based on 20 scenarios. You're going to have 26 minutes to answer these questions. Answering the situational judgment test questions is split into two types. One is going to be based on the appropriateness of an action, and the other one is going to be based on the importance of the action. You're going to be asked to rate a series of questions based on importance or appropriateness. This is going to take time to develop the skill of answering these questions correctly, but through practice, you will gain a good sense of what is most important and what is most appropriate.
So in terms of the assessment of this section, the SJT is marked slightly differently to the other sections. Instead of being given a numerical score, you are going to be allocated a band based on how many of your answers matched correctly or were partially correct. There are 4 bands you can get, with band 1 being the highest scoring band and band 4 being the lowest. Some universities will unfortunately reject applicants who have an SJT band 4, regardless of your other score. This includes the University of Leicester, so it's important that you do everything you can to gain a high score in this section. In order for you to succeed in this, we have again put together a list of top tips you can use. So firstly, it helps to sort of put yourself in the position of the individual stated in the question and consider what you would do in real time. This might be obvious, but actively trying to think it through might help a lot. Also use your common sense. If the answer seems to be very obviously wrong, chances are it's because it is. And try to only answer the question using context that is given in the scenario. All the information you need will be in the question itself. It also helps to have an idea of appropriate behavior of a good doctor or clinician. This includes reading documents like the General Medical Council's Good Medical Practice, if you haven't done so already, because it's going to give you a solid idea of the principles that doctors will have to follow. Another great way to do well is by understanding the 4 pillars of medical ethics. These are guidelines that medical practitioners should follow in order to undertake their practice ethically. And understanding these 4 pillars and how they interact with each other will not only help you with your UCAT and interviews, but also during your time at medical school and your future career as a doctor.
So talking about some general tips for the UCAT, make sure you answer everything. If you can't narrow down the answers due to time constraints, make sure that you make a guess, as you still have a 25% chance of being correct. If you didn't already know, statistics has shown that always selecting the same answer for any questions that you don't know will likely give you the most correct response. Make sure that you think logically, especially in quantitative reasoning. Use the flagging tools to highlight areas that you need to revisit at the end if you have time. Don't make assumptions and don't bring in your own viewpoint into answers. Use context that have been provided. It is better to get 70% of the questions correct and guess the rest of the questions than answer all 100% of the questions and not be sure how you've done. Make sure that you do follow the timing strictly. As we've said before, even if you haven't finished a question, make sure that you pick an answer, flag it, and move on. And it's definitely worth practicing. It might be worth doing the UCAT mock a few times to get used to the keys that you can use for things like flagging or using the calculator. We can't emphasize enough how much practice means in this. So please make sure that you're doing as many tests as you can.
So how do you best prepare for your UCAT? As I'm sure you're aware, the UCAT is not an easy test and it is made to challenge you. And that's why good preparation is very important for success. There is no such thing as too much practice, and the more mock tests you do, the more you'll get used to the style of exam. And this will help you get used to the questions and the online tools, like we said, like the calculator and the flagging tools. Many universities use the UCAT to choose applicants, so use this to motivate yourself. The time you invest in your preparation could determine whether or not you get a place at the university. And try your best to put in as much of your time and effort into doing practice mock tests. I know it might get repetitive and you might feel like you're not improving or progressing like you want and like there's no end, but a lot of people end up doing better on the day of the test. So use this to motivate you to get through all those mock tests. And while it is important to work hard and spend a lot of time practicing, also make sure that you're getting enough breaks and not burning yourself out, because you have to remember that there are other parts of the application that you have to prepare for. And as difficult as the process might be, Just give it your best so that later on down the line, you can look back and remember that you gave it your all and made the most of what was available to you at the time.
Thank you for listening into this recording. Please make use of it by going back and checking the relevant sections in your own time. We look forward to seeing you in the workshop, where we're going to be going over some of the practice questions with medical students and answering any questions that you may have.